The crystal chandeliers sparkled overhead, casting a magical glow across the Grand Plaza Hotel's ballroom. Pink and white roses adorned every table, their delicate fragrance filling the air with promise and romance. It was supposed to be perfect. Sophia Carter stood at the altar, her white dress a masterpiece of lace and dreams, facing the man she thought would be her forever, Ethan Blake, the rising star of Blake Industries. But perfection, as Sophia would soon learn, was a cruel illusion. The first whispers started like a gentle breeze, rippling through the crowd of Silicon Valley's elite. Something was wrong. Ethan's jaw tightened, his custom-tailored tuxedo suddenly seeming too stiff, too formal. The priest's voice faltered, trailing into uncomfortable silence. Then, with a calmness that cut deeper than rage, Ethan stepped back. His voice, amplified by the microphone, echoed through the stunned silence. "I can't." A collective gasp swept through the guests. Sophia's heart stopped, blood draining from her face as she searched his eyes, desperate for any explanation, any sign that this was just a horrible joke. "Ethan," she whispered, her voice trembling, "what are you doing?" But he wouldn't meet her gaze. Instead, he turned to address the crowd, speaking as if she weren't even there. "This marriage, it's a mistake. I've come to realize that Sophia isn't suited for the future of Blake Industries." The words hit her like physical blows. Not suited. The whispers grew louder, phones already recording what would become tomorrow's scandal. But in the corner of the room, unnoticed by all, stood Liam Harper, the event's head of security, his dark eyes taking in every detail of the unfolding tragedy. Little did anyone know, this man would change everything. Sophia's world crumbled around her. The whispers turned into murmurs, then full-blown conversations. She could feel every pair of eyes in the room burning into her, judging her, pitying her. Her father, seated in the front row, looked pale and stunned, his hands gripping the edge of his chair as if it were the only thing keeping him upright. But Sophia couldn't stay there. She couldn't face the humiliation, the cameras, the reporters already scribbling their headlines. Her legs felt like lead, but somehow she managed to turn and flee, clutching the folds of her wedding dress as she stumbled down the marble aisle. The sound of her heels echoed in the grand ballroom, a cruel reminder of the silence that had followed Ethan's words. She didn't stop until she found herself in a dimly lit service corridor, far from the opulence of the ballroom. The cold tiles pressed against her back as she slid down the wall, her veil discarded and her dress pooling around her like a broken dream. The sobs came then, raw, uncontrollable, and echoing off the empty walls. She had lost everything. Not just Ethan, but her dignity, her confidence, her sense of self. His words replayed in her mind like a cruel mantra. Not suited, not enough. Us? The voice startled her. She looked up, her tear-streaked face meeting the concerned gaze of a man in a plain black security uniform. He stood a few feet away, his broad shoulders tense, his hands clasped in front of him as if unsure whether to approach. "Please," she choked out, her voice barely audible, "I just want to be alone." The man hesitated, then nodded. "I understand," he said softly, but he didn't leave. Instead, he leaned against the opposite wall, giving her space but not abandoning her. His presence was steady, grounding, like an anchor in the storm of her emotions. "I'm sorry for what happened back there," he said after a moment, his voice calm and even. "No one deserves to be treated like that." Sophia let out a bitter laugh, wiping at her face with trembling hands. You don't understand," she whispered. "He said that I wasn't good enough, and now everyone knows it." The man's expression softened, and he took a cautious step closer. "You didn't lose everything," he said gently. "You lost a man who clearly didn't deserve you." His words caught her off guard. She looked up at him, her red-rimmed eyes filled with disbelief. "I don't even know you," she said, her voice cracking. He held her gaze, his dark eyes steady and sincere. "Because I know what it feels like to be told you're not enough," he said quietly. "And I know that whoever told you that was wrong." The silence between them stretched, heavy but not uncomfortable. For the first time that night, Sophia felt something other than pain. It was small, barely noticeable, but it was there, a flicker of hope, and it had come from a stranger. Outside, the rain began to fall, soft and steady, washing away the remnants of what was supposed to be the happiest day of her life. But in that quiet hallway, for the first time since her heart had shattered, Sophia didn't feel completely alone. The next morning the headlines were brutal. Left at the altar, Ethan Blake calls off wedding in front of hundreds. Not good enough. Sophia Carter humiliated by tech mogul fiancé. Sophia sat curled up on her mother's old couch, the soft glow of the TV reflecting the same words she had been trying to avoid. Her phone buzzed endlessly with messages, some from friends, most from curious gossipers wanting the latest scoop. The wedding dress, now a crumpled heap in the corner of the room, was a cruel reminder of her humiliation. "You're not enough," the words echoed, louder than anything else, drowning out the sound of the TV, the rain outside, even her own thoughts. Her face burned with shame. Everyone had seen it. And worse, they pitied her. A soft knock at the door startled her. She hesitated, then opened it slowly, blinking in surprise when she saw Liam standing there. He looked the same as he had the night before, calm, composed, and somehow reassuring. "Liam," she whispered, her voice hoarse from crying. He held out a brown paper bag. "You didn't eat yesterday," he said simply. "Thought you might need this." Inside was a sandwich and a bottle of water. Simple, thoughtful. Her throat tightened as she stared at the bag, unsure why his kindness struck her so deeply. "I'm not here to bother you," he added, shifting uncomfortably. "I just wanted to check if you were okay." Sophia let out a broken laugh, shaking her head. "Do I look okay?" Liam hesitated, then shook his head. "No," he admitted. "But you're still standing. That means something." His words hit her harder than she expected. Still standing, barely, but she was, and for the first time in days she felt like maybe, just maybe, she could keep going. The days that followed were a blur of shame and isolation for Sophia. The headlines didn't stop, and neither did the whispers. Every time she stepped outside, she felt the weight of the world's judgment pressing down on her. Even the grocery store felt like a battlefield, with strangers glancing at her, their pity and curiosity written all over their faces. She stopped answering her phone. The messages from friends, well-meaning but laced with awkwardness, only made her feel worse. And the messages from strangers, asking for her side of the story, were unbearable. She stayed inside, curled up on the couch, replaying Ethan's words over and over in her mind. It was on one of those days, when the rain outside mirrored the storm inside her, that Liam showed up again. This time he didn't knock. He simply stood outside her door, holding a small umbrella and a takeout bag, waiting patiently until she finally opened it. "Liam," she said, her voice tired and raw. "What are you doing here?" "You didn't answer your phone," he said simply, holding up the bag. "I brought dinner." Sophia sighed, stepping aside to let him in. She didn't have the energy to argue. Liam set the bag on the counter and began unpacking it, 2 containers of soup, a loaf of bread, and a small container of butter. It was simple, unassuming, but the smell of the warm soup filled the room with a kind of comfort she hadn't felt in days. "You don't have to keep checking on me," she said, sitting down at the table. "I'm fine." Liam raised an eyebrow as he poured the soup into bowls. "You're not fine," he said matter-of-factly. "But that's okay. You don't have to be." Sophia stared at him, unsure how to respond. There was something about Liam, his calmness, his quiet strength, that made it hard to push him away. He didn't pity her. He didn't try to fix her. He just showed up. They ate in silence, the sound of the rain outside filling the gaps between them. When they were done, Liam leaned back in his chair, studying her carefully. Sophia, he said finally, his voice steady but soft. I have an idea. She frowned, setting down her spoon. What kind of idea? He hesitated, as if weighing his words carefully. Marry me. The words hung in the air, so unexpected that Sophia wasn't sure she'd heard him right. What? She said, her voice barely above a whisper. Marry me, Liam repeated, his gaze unwavering. Not for love, not for forever, just to give you a chance to start over, to show the world that you're not some cast-off, that you're stronger than what happened to you. Sophia blinked, her mind racing. Liam, that's insane. We don't even know each other. I know enough, he said simply. I know you're kind. I know you're strong, even when you don't feel like it. And I know you deserve better than the way he made you. She shook her head, her hands trembling. I can't just marry you. That's crazy. Maybe, Liam admitted, leaning forward. But what do you have to lose? A question hit her harder than she expected. What did she have to lose? Her reputation was already in shambles. Her confidence was gone. And yet, here was this man, this stranger, offering her a way out, a way to reclaim her dignity, even if it was unconventional. I don't know, she whispered, her voice breaking. I don't know if I can do this. Liam reached across the table, his hand steady and warm as it covered hers. You don't have to decide right now, he said gently, but think about it. You deserve a fresh start, Sophia, and I want to help you find it. The next morning, Sophia woke up with Liam's words still echoing in her mind. She spent hours pacing her small apartment, weighing the pros and cons, trying to make sense of the impossible decision in front of her. By the time the sun began to set, she had made up her mind. The courthouse was small and quiet, a far cry from the grand ballroom where her first wedding had fallen apart. Sophia wore a simple ivory dress, nothing like the elaborate lace gown she had once dreamed of. Liam stood beside her, his black suit modest but perfectly tailored. There were no guests, no photographers, no fanfare. Just, do you, Sophia Carter, take Liam Harper to be your lawfully wedded husband? Sophia hesitated, her heart pounding. This wasn't love. This wasn't a fairy tale. But as she glanced at Liam, his steady gaze grounding her, she realized it didn't have to be. This was a chance to start over, to rebuild herself, to prove that she was more than the woman Ethan had left behind. I do, she whispered. Liam's turn came, and his voice was strong, unwavering. When it was over, they stepped outside into the drizzle, the rain soft and cleansing. There was no kiss, no celebration, just a quiet understanding between them. Sophia clutched the simple gold band on her finger, the weight of it both strange and comforting. Where did you do this? She asked softly, glancing at Liam as they walked down the courthouse steps. He met her gaze, his expression calm but sincere. Because you needed someone, he said simply. And maybe I needed someone too. Sophia didn't press for more. She didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in weeks, she felt like she could breathe again. The first few weeks of their marriage were quiet, almost surreal. Sophia moved into Liam's modest apartment, a small but cozy space that felt worlds away from the life she had once imagined for herself. There were no grand gestures, no romantic declarations. Their relationship was built on a quiet understanding, a mutual respect that grew stronger with each passing day. Liam was kind, thoughtful, in ways that surprised her. He cooked breakfast every morning, leaving her coffee just the way she liked it, 2 sugars, no cream. He fixed the leaky faucet in the bathroom without her even asking, and when her mother's medical bills started piling up, he quietly paid them off, refusing to let her worry about it. But there was something about Liam that didn't quite add up. He was too composed, too confident for someone who claimed to be just a security guard. His apartment, though modest, was impeccably furnished, with small details like the original artwork on the walls and the high-end kitchen appliances that hinted at a life far beyond what he let on. Sophia tried not to think too much about it. After all, Liam had given her a second chance, a way to rebuild her life, She didn't want to question his motives or pry into his past. But the curiosity lingered, growing stronger with each passing day. It wasn't until one rainy afternoon that she stumbled upon the truth. Sophia had been cleaning the apartment, trying to keep herself busy while Liam was at work. She was sorting through a pile of jackets in the closet when her hand brushed against something in the pocket of one of his coats. Frowning, she pulled it out. A crisp white envelope with the words Harper Enterprises printed in bold letters across the top. Her heart skipped a beat. She stared at the envelope, her mind racing. Harper Enterprises. The name sounded familiar, but she couldn't quite place it. Setting the jacket aside, she opened the envelope and pulled out a letter. The words blurred together at first, but as she read, the truth became impossible to ignore. Liam Harper wasn't just a security guard. He was the CEO of Harper Enterprises, one of the largest private investment firms in the country. The letter was a formal invitation to a board meeting addressed to him as the company's founder and majority shareholder. Sophia's hands trembled as she set the letter down. Her mind reeled with questions. Why had he lied to her? Why had he pretended to be someone he wasn't? And most importantly, what did this mean for their marriage? When Liam came home that evening, she was waiting for him in the living room, the letter clutched tightly in her hand. He froze in the doorway when he saw her expression, his usual calm demeanor faltering for the first time. "Upa and counselin', huh?" he said carefully, setting down his keys. "What's wrong?" She held up the letter, her voice shaking. "You lied to me." Liam's shoulders sagged and he let out a long sigh. "I didn't lie," he said quietly. "I just didn't tell you everything." "Didn't tell me everything," she repeated, her voice rising. "You let me believe you were a security guard, Liam. You let me think you were just some ordinary guy trying to help me, but you're not. You're a millionaire, a CEO. Why would you hide that from me?" Liam stepped closer, his dark eyes filled with something she couldn't quite place. Regret, maybe? Or guilt? "Because I didn't want you to see me the way everyone else does," he said softly. "I've spent my whole life surrounded by people who only care about my money, my status. I wanted to know if someone could care about me for who I am, not what I have." Sophia stared at him, her emotions a whirlwind of anger, confusion, and something she couldn't quite name. "So what was this?" she asked, gesturing between them. "Some kind of test? Were you just waiting to see if I'd figure it out?" "No," Liam said firmly, his voice steady. "This wasn't a test. I didn't plan for any of this to happen. I saw you that night and I couldn't walk away. I wanted to help you, to give you a chance to start over. And somewhere along the way, I realized I needed you just as much as you needed me." His words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. Sophia wanted to believe him, but the betrayal still stung. "You should have told me," she said quietly, her voice breaking. "You should have trusted me." "I know," Liam said, his expression pained. "And I'm sorry, I didn't mean to hurt you, Sophia. I didn't know how to tell you without losing you." Sophia looked away, her mind racing. She didn't know what to think, what to feel. Liam had been her anchor, her safe place in the storm. But now she wasn't sure if she could trust him. "I need some time," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "I need to figure out what this means." Liam nodded, his jaw tight. "Take all the time you need," he said softly. "I'll be here when you're ready." As he walked away, Sophia felt a pang of something she couldn't quite name. Loss, maybe, or the fear of losing something she hadn't even realized she wanted. She clutched the letter in her hand, staring out the window as the rain continued to fall, wondering if she could ever truly forgive him. The days that followed were some of the hardest Sophia had ever faced. She stayed in the apartment, avoiding Liam and the questions swirling in her mind. She couldn't stop thinking about the man she thought she knew, the quiet, humble security guard who had offered her a lifeline when she was drowning. Now she couldn't reconcile that image with the truth. Liam Harper, the million. But it wasn't just the betrayal that haunted her. It was the nagging voice in the back of her mind, the one that whispered she wasn't good enough for someone like him. Ethan's words came rushing back, cruel and cutting. "You're not suited for my world." And now, here she was again, feeling like an outsider in a life she didn't belong to. The media didn't make it any easier. Somehow, the story of her marriage to Liam had leaked, and the headlines were relentless. From left at the altar to millionaire's wife, Sophia Carter's unlikely comeback. Security guard or CEO? The truth about Liam Harper's secret marriage. Sophia couldn't escape the scrutiny. Strangers on the street whispered as she passed, their eyes filled with curiosity and judgment. Even her old friends, the ones who had distanced themselves after the wedding fiasco, started reaching out again, not to support her, but to pry into her new life. And then there was Ethan. He showed up one afternoon, uninvited and unannounced, standing in the doorway of the apartment like a ghost from her past. Sophia froze when she saw him, her heart pounding in her chest. He looked the same as he always had, polished, confident, and utterly infuriating. "Sophia?" he said smoothly, his voice dripping with false concern. "I heard about your situation. I thought I'd check in." She crossed her arms, her voice cold. "What do you want, Ethan?" He stepped inside without waiting for an invitation, his eyes scanning the modest apartment with thinly veiled disdain. "I just wanted to see how you were doing," he said, his tone condescending. "I mean, it must be quite the adjustment, going from being humiliated at the altar to—" Sophia's jaw tightened, but she refused to let him see how much his words stung. "I'm fine," she said sharply, "and I don't need your concern." Ethan smirked, leaning casually against the wall. "You know, I have to admit, I didn't see this coming. Marrying a security guard, or should I say a former security guard? Quite the step down, don't you think?" Her hands clenched into fists at her sides. "Liam is more of a man than you'll ever be," she snapped, her voice trembling with anger. "He's kind, he's honest, and he doesn't care about status or appearances, unlike you." Ethan's smirk faltered for a moment, but he quickly recovered. "Oh, Sophia," he said, shaking his head. "You really think this is going to last? You don't belong in his world. You didn't belong in mine, and you certainly don't belong in his." The words hit her like a punch to the gut, but she refused to let him see her break. "Get out," she said, her voice low and steady. "Now." Ethan hesitated, as if considering whether to push further, but something in her expression made him think twice. With a shrug, he turned and walked out, leaving her standing in the middle of the room, her heart pounding and her mind racing. That night, Sophia sat alone in the apartment, staring at the simple gold band on her finger. Ethan's words echoed in her mind, feeding the doubts that had been growing since she discovered Liam's secret. She felt like she was drowning again, the weight of the world pressing down on her. But then she thought about Liam, about the way he had looked at her that night in the hallway, when she was at her lowest, about the quiet kindness he had shown her, the way he had never judged her or made her feel small. He had given her a chance to start over, to rebuild herself. And now, she realized, it was up to her to decide if she was willing to fight for that chance. The next morning, she made her decision. Sophia packed a small bag and left a note on the kitchen counter. The words were simple but heartfelt. "I need time to figure out who I am and what I want. This isn't goodbye, but I need to do this for myself." She didn't know where she was going, but she knew she needed to get away from the media, from the whispers, from the doubts that had been eating away at her. She needed to find herself again, to prove to herself that she was more than the woman Ethan had left behind. When Liam came home that evening and found the note, his heart sank. He had known this might happen, but it didn't make it any easier. He sat down at the kitchen table, staring at the empty space where she had been, and made a silent promise to himself. He wouldn't give up on her, not now, not ever. Weeks passed, and the apartment felt emptier with each day. Liam went about his routine, but the absence of Sophia was a constant ache. He missed her laugh, the way she hummed softly when she thought no one was listening, the quiet strength she didn't even realize she had. He had let her go because he knew she needed time, but that Sophia, meanwhile, had retreated to a small coastal town, far from the chaos of the city and the prying eyes of the media. She rented a tiny cottage by the sea, spending her days walking along the shore and her nights journaling, trying to make sense of everything that had happened. For the first time in years, she was alone with her thoughts, and it was both terrifying and liberating. She thought about Liam often, about the way he had looked at her not with pity or judgment, but with genuine care. She thought about the sacrifices he had made for her, the way he had quietly supported her without asking for anything in return. And she thought about the way she had left, without giving him the chance to explain, to fight for what they had. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, Sophia realized something. She had spent so much of her life letting other people define her, Ethan, the media, even her own doubts. But Liam had never done that. He had seen her for who she truly was, even when she couldn't see it herself. And she realized she didn't want to lose that. She didn't want to lose him. Back in the city, Liam was preparing for a charity gala he had been planning for months. It was a cause close to his heart, raising funds for underprivileged children, and he had poured his energy into it as a way to distract himself from the pain of losing Sophia. But as he stood in the grand ballroom, surrounded by hundreds of guests, he couldn't help but feel the emptiness creeping in. The evening was in full swing when the doors to the ballroom opened, and Liam's breath caught in his throat. There she was, Sophia, standing in the doorway, her eyes scanning the room until they found his. She looked nervous, but there was a determination in her gaze that made his heart race. Liam crossed the room in seconds, stopping just a few feet away from her. "Sophia," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "You're here." She nodded, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "I'm here," she said softly, "and I'm sorry. I shouldn't have left the way I did. I needed to figure out who I was without all the noise." "And did you?" he asked, his voice steady but filled with emotion. She smiled, a small tentative smile that lit up her face. "I did. And I realized something, Liam. I don't care about your money or your status. I care about you. The man who saw me when no one else did. The man who gave me a second chance when I didn't think I deserved one." Liam's chest tightened, and for the first time in weeks, he felt like he could breathe again. "Sophia," he said, his voice breaking, "you've always been enough. You've always been more than enough." Tears spilled down her cheeks as she stepped closer, her hand reaching for his. "I don't want to run anymore," she said. "I want to fight for this, for us." Liam didn't hesitate. He pulled her into his arms, holding her tightly as the room around them seemed to fade away. "I'll fight for us too," he whispered. "Every day." The guests around them began to applaud, but neither of them noticed. In that moment, it was just the two of them, standing together in the middle of the grand ballroom, ready to face whatever came next. As the night went on, they danced under the soft glow of the chandeliers, their hearts lighter than they had been in months. And for the first time in a long time, Sophia felt like she was exactly where she was meant to be by Liam's side, not as the woman who had been left behind, but as the woman who had found herself again. Thank you so much for watching this heartfelt story. If you enjoyed it and want to hear more inspiring tales about love, resilience, and finding yourself, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to our channel, Emma's Stories. We post new stories every week, so make sure to turn on the notification bell so you never miss an update. And if this story touched your heart, let us know in the comments below. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Thank you for being a part of Emma's Stories. Until next time, take care and keep believing in the power of love and second chances.